Hey everyone, welcome back to our series on the Haitian Revolution. I'm back here again today with Luke,
Yo.
Will,
Hello.
and Andy.
Yeah.
And we'll be picking right up with the French colony of Saint-Domingue, which is now undergoing a series of revolts among the white colonists, the free black population, and the slaves. Each of them sparked a fight due to the turmoil of the French Revolution back in France. So, diving right into the chaotic mess, as we have like five or six different groups of people fighting around, broadly speaking. The chaos in Sandaman has also started attracting the interest of, shall we say, some more outside forces. So, if you think back to Sandaman, the colony, which is part of an island, the other part of the island is held by the Spanish, who at this point were very much pro monarchy and very, very not happy with the French Revolution going
Oh,
on.
that's right. There weren't people very concerned about the ideas of the French Revolution spreading like communism, like dominoes.
I mean, oh, absolutely. Like the French were, especially starting around like this time period. So, like in 1932, the more radical wings of the French Revolution, the Jacobins, have started like seizing control, and they're all about we should spread the ideals of revolution all across Europe, um, and maybe into the colonies too. We'll see how that works out. So the Spanish are definitely a bit iffy on the entire thing. And the English too, because like whenever there's chaos for France, England always sees this as an opportunity to step in and get some wins. So at this point, as we see slaves and free blacks and free whites slaughtering each other in San Domingue, we see mass waves of refugees fleeing to Spanish Cuba and to the United States. We also see countries like Spain and England being like, you know what? Seeing that this is like the world's wealthiest colony, responsible for like half of the sugar and half of the coffee supply in the Western Hemisphere, this might be a good time to sweep in and just like take it, you know? Not that we're doing this just to like get money. No, no, no. We're doing this because we are anti-revolutionaries. Because, we're opposed to the revolution. And this is
Hate those guys.
yeah, exactly. We don't want them to use this ill-gotten gains from all the sugar to fund their revolutionary zeal and all that jazz. So
That's
England,
not their sugar.
yeah, it's not their
France's
sugar.
sugar.
Yeah.
We don't want them getting a sugar high on their revolution high.
Oh no, that's basically my sister on a Friday night.
Oh,
So
God.
Have you told her that sugar highs aren't real? I've tried telling her that a couple times.
I don't know. If you see the effect of sugar on her, you would believe it's real too.
I've seen it. I still don't think. I think she's making it up.
Well, maybe you have more
Just like
guts
the
than I do. in
slaves are
terms of
making
dealing
up
with
their
that kind of
problems.
stuff.
They're not real.
I'm just saying, if she downs like a few like pieces of chocolate, if she goes out on
Bro,
Halloween,
they're not real. It's not real, bro. Just close your eyes, bro.
yeah, there's no sugar high in Saint Domingue. What are you talking about? But basically, as a result of this whole crazy mess going on there, we see the English actually preparing a military force to be landed in Santo Domingo, like in Spanish Santo Domingo, to march into Haiti or Saint Domingue, the western half, the French half. And the Spanish, because like as a powerful slave society, decided we understand the dynamics of slave revolts. So we're just going to do what we do best and capitalize on slavery by promising to free the slaves if they rebel against the French. Because clearly that's not going to backfire, giving promises of freedoms to slaves, even though you have slaves yourself. That's never a
At this
problem.
point, was the business with Spanish Florida still happening? Just
The business with Spanish Florida wasn't a big French thing at this point.
yeah,
The
but
French
like,
weren't too concerned.
but I'm asking, like, had the Adams-Onis Treaty been signed yet? What year is this again?
This is 1792.
92. So definitely not. Okay.
Yeah, that was 1819. Well after
But
the.
yeah, I was just wondering if Spain would have any problems with Britain kind of coming in their space.
Well,
That does
Spain
sound like a
definitely
problem.
has problems. But the thing is, at this point, believe it or not, Spain and Britain were actually like allies against France.
Yeah.
because everyone in Europe was pretty much like fuck the French at this point because they're revolutionaries and all that stuff. So despite the long-held animosity between Spain and England, they actually were working together to try to curb the revolution. So they were actually okay with that. They were kind of working in tandem. But basically, the Spanish in particular started arming and supplying rebel slave enclaves who would sometimes like flee over to the Spanish Santo Domingo side just to like get some refuge from the French and all the chaos going on.
You know,
Okay.
heavily arming revolutionaries has not been that great of a strategy over time.
Well, yes, arming revolutionaries, but in this case, they're arming counter-revolutionaries.
Okay, so hang on. Who
Green
are
meat.
they arming? Are they arming the slaves? Are they arming the revolutionaries? Are they arming the counter-revolutionaries?
Well,
This is a little confusing.
I'm not sure if you remember from before, but like the slaves had a lot of different factions.
Well, you
they were
said
like
the
fighting
word.
for a lot
No,
of
no.
different purposes.
I believe you said the word wrong. I think you said that they were funding the slaves.
They were funding the slaves, who, in some sense, were also
Oh,
counter-revolutionaries.
the slaves who were the counter-revolutionaries. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so like
Ah.
as I said before, they were like a group of folks who were like, we're still loyal to the king. You know, we all care about the king and the church. They're the two institutions, even though we're slaves. You know, we support that kind of stuff, and we're like trying to overthrow the wealthy landowners who are trying to get independence, because the white landowners were afraid that Paris was like all about, you know, full-on liberalization of everything, including freeing all the slaves. So they were trying to secede and pull a whole America on France. And then there's the free black folk who are, you know, all about we just want citizenship and enfranchisement and to like exercise the ideas of the revolution. So we don't want independence. We just want to be like France. So there's a whole mess of this stuff going on. But basically, some of them at this point have been feeling like all this chaos caused by the French Revolution, this is kind of bad. Why don't we just say that we want things to be back like things were before? Because, you know, we might not be put into such a bad position, and they might also give us our freedom, because who knows?
Wow, this
Stranger
is
things have happened.
pretty much a four-way then.
Ha! If you want to simplify it
There's
to
like-
that, yes.
Yeah.
Trust me, there's a lot more factions going on in there too. But basically, as a result of this, France had to step in. Like before, they've like sent like the odd messages over there, being like, "Oh, you know, we're just gonna go ahead and allow black free folk to go ahead and become citizens." And then when there's like a public outcry by the white, especially the upper and lower whites, who saw the established free blacks as becoming like almost an economic challenge to them, they went ahead and rescinded that. So then they started revolting. So now France is like, you know what? We're just going to put some feelers on the ground. We're going to send some folks. We're going to send some troops. So they send a few commissioners along with, I want to say around like 4,000 troops to try and keep the peace in Saint-Domingue.
Also, with regards to the weaponry, they just dumped it on the island and then had people go to
Oh,
loot
did
tables.
in loot crates? I see.
In
Yeah.
loot crates, yeah. And they,
And they all
you know,
had
the
to fight
British,
over
they were
it.
basically just diving out of a flying school bus.
Mhm.
You know. But basically, this battle royale, effectively, between all these various factions were, well, they started to try to mediate this by dropping in a few of these commissioners, who, as I said before, were more on the radical side of things, the more Jacobin side of things. So they come in and they like look over the situation and they're like, well, I mean, the biggest problem is that we have a slave revolt on our hands, and that's being intensified by outside influences. You know, we got the Spanish, we got the British, we got the FBI, which doesn't exist, and I'm sure the CIA, which also doesn't exist, but you know, they always have a hand in this kind of stuff.
They called the
Naturally.
Illuminati back then.
Yeah, the Illuminati and the Freemasons. I'm sure they got something behind this as well.
Yeah.
But basically, they're like, at the end of the day, if we have enough to quell the slave revolt, that's all that matters. So, option one, to stop the slave revolt. You could send a shit ton of troops over. But that wasn't going to happen anytime soon, because at this point, France basically declared war on every country in Europe, pretty much.
It worked out well for a while.
If you call basically having to draft all men of like 18 to like 40 to join the active services, then yeah, I guess.
Man.
But
There
it
is
there
definitely
have been
was-
worse wars.
I can believe it.
That's true. That's true. But at this point, France was like literally dragging up the drudges of society to go and fight in these wars, and barely keeping itself afloat. So that probably wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Reinforcements in the colonies, when the motherland itself is like openly invaded by the Prussians and the Austrians, probably not going to happen. So
They
look
did
at
also
option
later
two.
have to sell Louisiana for about $2.
Yeah, well, that wasn't the
Didn't work out.
that wasn't the revolutionary government. That was
Yeah,
Napoleon.
no, that was
Yeah.
the real.
Yeah,
big
this
government.
is before Napoleon came around. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, they didn't even have the Louisiana territory at this time period. This was actually under control of Spain.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Spain had
because
a lot.
Napoleon was the guy who went in and basically bullied everyone into giving him stuff until Russia was like, well, you can't get anything from nothing. So
Yeah.
they burned their entire countryside.
And it worked.
It worked. It worked.
It was
France
extremely
wasn't
cool.
used to being denied by like having everything destroyed in their eyes.
Yeah.
But basically, the commissioners think option two. We're not going to get troops from France to come over and help, but like there's like around 30,000 free blacks who have a stake in the game, have said that they're still cool with like remaining part of like France proper. Staying as one of our colonies if we just give them the right to vote, and like liberty, equality, fraternity, that's kind of our catchphrase, as much as they try to deny this in the colonies. That might work out, That's another 30,000 more people that we could swing to on our side. Because at this point, too, like some of the free blacks were also siding with the slaves just to like push back against the white colonists in Saint-Domingue.
So they didn't
So-
make them into 3/5 of a person.
No, they went ahead and straight up did a full enfranchisement of them.
Mm.
So
Which-
Everything except for the head, which they kept for ceremonial purposes.
Yeah. But remember, this is their second time trying this out. And the first time that this happened, well, that's what sparked the whole, like, we want independence for Saint-Domingue movement among the whites. So, like, this also wasn't super popular. So, and also, like, at the end of the day, 30,000 remember, we're talking about a slave population who, number one, wouldn't be getting anything out of this, and number two, numbered around 500,000. So, like,
numbers
yeah.
don't quite balance out.
Exactly. So they think this through a bit more, and at this point, like back in France too, they have like a lot more like vocal advocates for trying to get more more freedoms and more liberties over to these people. They're trying to gather more manpower to the sides of like supporting the French Revolution and keeping Saint-Domingue as part of the French Empire, and basically they're throwing around these ideas of like, why don't we just go ahead and establish like a plan to slowly phase out slavery, like, well, we'll promise like within 10 years or like within 3 generations,
Within 5 years, we will make a great leap forward.
well, I mean, at first, surprisingly enough, the radical revolutionaries were not all about that kind of radical change. So they were like, we'll take it slow. We'll do a few generations and then we'll like civilize them and save them from like their slavery. But we'll like keep the slave trade going. Because at the end of the day, in their minds, slavery is always a beneficial thing to the slaves as long as they could win their freedoms. Because we're taking them out of darkness from Africa and we're bringing them to the light. We're teaching them the ways of French civilization. So, the slave trade is good so long as they don't stay slaves forever.
And
really,
they're
that's the
also
way to say
broke as shit and could really use the money.
Oh yeah, no, the money thing was never far from their mind you. That's why they kept on pouring in manpower into Saint-Domingue. But the issue is the chaos on the ground makes it so that you can't really wait around for 3 generations to see the whole like free slave thing pay off.
Right.
also-
Sounds like once you give them one carrot, suddenly they're high off the carrot and they want cocaine next or something.
Yeah,
Right.
but this is
This thing about-
this is also like promising them something that you've repeatedly denied them, It's so like this is like trying to give them that like carrot, but always like yoinking it away, like not even having them nibble it a tiny bit and just saying, you'll get it, like your grandchildren can have this, but you can't. But you should fight for us.
Mom, you said this 2 generations ago. I want it now.
Mom says it's my turn
it's,
on the freedom.
slightly more pressing concern than whatever the hell the hypothetical person in my head wants to do.
Also, in your hypothetical situation, you're saying that the mother is the mother of 3 generations of people.
For convenience.
It's
Okay,
it's
alright.
not a very
We'll let it slide.
it's not a very thought out joke. It just kind of came up.
Sure.
The mother is symbolic.
It's symbolic of France.
It's not like they're doing much parenting either.
Yeah, but
What
basically,
is the French version of Britannia? That's basically the same thing, right?
Britannia,
Britannia, my bad.
Gallica, or Gallica, Gallica,
Gallica. Okay.
Yeah. But basically, offering them the potential for freedom for their grandkids wasn't really a big incentive, you know. Doesn't really make for a good bumper sticker to put on the side of your buggy. So,
The house is on fire, and it's okay. We'll put it out next time.
yeah, we'll put it down. We'll put it out after it burns down 2 more times from now. You know, this is their
Pell
deductible.
Grant. Yeah, small business owners making less than $40,000 a year with 8 kids can get $10 off on their next purchase.
So generous, man. But basically, as things got more and more intense, and as the French troops started being outpaced, and the British too, to some degree, by an army of free blacks, former slaves, and also to some degree some like poorer whites who were fighting under the leadership of this former slave by the name of Toussaint Louverture. The commissioners, I almost said commissars, they're freaking, Soviet representatives running around. Not yet, not at this time. But the commissioners realized, you know what, we're just gonna fast track this. And like we have some executive authority here, so we're just gonna say it. And in 1793, they go ahead and deliver the Emancipation Proclamation of Haiti. Basically going ahead and saying, you know what, we're just gonna go ahead and free all the slaves.
That came like 40 years earlier than they expected.
Yeah. And so like the people in Paris were like, wait, what? What's going on here? And they're like, just trust us, okay? We're getting our asses whooped by the British, the Spanish, and a bunch of freed slaves. We got to do something about this. So in August 29th, 1793, these commissioners just go ahead and write off on this proclamation and say, you're all free, with caveats. So,
well, what were the caveats?
Well, first off, now that you're free, all free men have to fight to protect the Republic against tyrants. So in other words, you're drafted. These former slaves, boom, now you're slaves in the sense that you're fighting for us in an army. And also, they established some terms which basically prevented the economy from going bottoms up immediately. So if you were a slave, now you get paid. But you get like paid the most meager pay that people could possibly muster up. It's like below minimum wage, basically. Like think barely subsistence. Probably even less than that. But on the bright side, they don't need to worry about being whipped or, torn apart from their families and stuff like that by their former slave masters.
Congratulations, slave. You've been promoted to conscript.
Yeah, pretty much. But it's something,
Yeah,
and
it's a step.
It's a step towards the right direction, I suppose. And the commissioners are like, let's just, as long as we get enough to like swing things onto our side, that's all that matters. And sure enough, when the notice of this Emancipation Proclamation gets out, and they have like, by the way, they have like their troops at the ready in case, once again, those white pro-independence or like anti-revolutionary white colonists decide to like rise up because this is like the last straw. They still have the French troops that were sent over from the mainland ready to put shit down. But they also get a knock at the door. So just as things are about to go to hell in a handbasket, Oui, ça va? Je m'appelle Toussaint Louverture. And in walks in a tall, handsome, and some people say with an aura of mystery kind of individual walks in.
The main protagonist.
The main protagonist, if you will. All right, he comes in, introduces himself as Toussaint Louverture, the bane of the French. You know, the guy who had that huge slave army, the former slave army that's like running loose in the eastern half of the island and just whooping the French ass. Well, he comes in and he's like, I heard that you abolished slavery. That's kind of cool, you know. I myself am a former slave. I was educated though and freed before this whole crazy shenanigans went down. I happen to speak many languages, including Haitian Creole and French, as well as a bunch of native African languages, so I could communicate with my slave army just fine. And I kind of have a resume here of me being able to whoop my now soon-to-be employer's ass multiple times. But I'm going to give you an offer that you can't refuse. I'm going to fight on your side.
So he's offering his services to the French?
To the French
government, basically?
Yeah, and the French government's like, wait a second, hold on. Weren't you paid and armed by the Spanish? And he's like, well, that's neither here nor there.
You see, you're being paid and armed by the Spanish.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, things can change. If you decide to start paying me, make me a general, a lieutenant governor, I can help turn the tide, I got a few suggestions in my mind, and I could, if you refuse me, I could just keep on fighting for the Spanish, we'll see how long this goes. So they're like, I mean, this is like perfect, Now here we are with like arguably the most powerful military force on the entire island of Hispaniola, swinging their allegiance over to France. And yeah, we'll name him lieutenant governor, but like, that's not going to mean anything. This is a tiny colony. We don't even know if we're going to survive the winter. Never mind worry about trying to turn this this colony profitable again. This is like the deal of a century right here,
An offer they literally cannot refuse.
Yeah, they like literally cannot refuse at this point. So they go ahead, they shake on it, and next thing you know, Toussaint Louverture has kicked out the British from Saint-Domingue, and he's like pushed the Spanish back to the point where they had to like fight for a truce. So sure enough, once again, this former slave comes in and flips the tables, first on the French, and then he turns around and flips the tables on the Spanish and the British who were supporting him before.
And he got a nice little lieutenant governor title out of it.
Yeah, he got named lieutenant governor, and he's also, because of his military service, he's able to get close with a lot of the former slaves, and also a lot of his subordinates, his various lieutenants and officers, who also, because of their services, got put into some pretty cozy positions in the governing body of Saint-Domingue. So things are looking up and up. At this point, peace has been restored back to the island, or half island. Slavery's been abolished, so everything seems great, right? And now we even have our first black lieutenant governor in charge of a colony. Like this is progressive, This is what change looks like. And now we're dealing with slave revolts again. Now hold on. I know what you're thinking. Slave revolts?
More
again?
slave revolts.
Yeah, like what's going on? I thought they abolished slavery. Well, slavery's abolished, but basically they're put into a system of serfdom, effectively slavery, with like a few small caveats here and there that gives them some slight protection.
Did they get the company script?
Sorry?
Did they get the company script? Did they get to buy food at the company store?
Well, no, they were given a small, tiny plot of land, which was loaned to them by their former masters, so they could grow their own food. So,
amazing.
Yeah,
good one.
And also, they're not allowed to work on that all the time. So, once again, just like slaves, pretty much. But basically, as freed slaves, they were able to go ahead and fuck themselves with the arrival of Toussaint Louverture, who, although a former slave himself, was more like, as a true liberal, my mind occupies the space of how to best serve the people through
Wait. Very
improving
important
the
question.
economy. Yes.
Did you just say fuck themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah. He basically just told them to fuck themselves.
Oh, okay.
What are they
The
going to
former slave did that.
Yeah, a former slave told a bunch of now former slaves to go fuck themselves because maintaining the economy of Saint-Domingue is more important. So, yeah.
We've all
Pretty
heard
much
that story.
Yeah, so he goes off and he's like, "Look, we just burned a bunch of plantations for the past few years. Like things are gonna be a bit tough. So let's just tighten our belts, and go out there, work those 20-hour work shifts, and we'll go ahead and turn things back around. And then we'll talk about, allowing you some social mobility in life." What? Yes? Yeah. I know. I was a former slave. Yeah, no. But I earned this, bruh. I earned this position. Y'all have to earn your spot in the hierarchy too. So, oh, by the way, I heard there's this new guy by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. Don't know what his deal is. Heard he's like an Italian immigrant who grew up in Corsica, like the boondocks of France, basically. And he's trying to make himself consul for life. Huh. It's not a bad gig. So, sure enough, when Napoleon takes over, Tousey Louverture sends him a nice letter, and he's like, "Hey, Boney, my man, my brother from another mother, how you doing? Listen, I like what you're going for here, this whole, like, for life thing, and, like, taking over because you're a great general. Well, I'm not sure if you heard, but I kind of did the same thing in Saint-Domingue, and, look, I ain't asking for much. I'm not trying to make my place independent or anything, but, like, you might want to make me governor for life. Just a suggestion. I'm gonna drop it right there. You could do what you want with it, but like, I run the biggest army in the colonies, so you might want to do what I'm saying. You feel?
And then he says, and then he says, "Deal, but only if you never call me Boney again."
Yeah. I was going to say, if he called him Boney, he'd probably get his head cut off.
Yeah, well,
you shall refer to me as
cutting off
Nappy from now on.
Nappy. But basically, just goes in there and it's like, "Would you just make me, governor for life of Saint-Domingue?" And sure enough, Napoleon, who at this point is, once again, very much just trying to, like, maintain his own power at this point, is like, "All right, I can respect that,
This
he
seems
fought
fair.
for this. Yeah, like, he knows what he's doing. So, like, I'm okay with that. I don't know what he's doing with his power. Apparently he doesn't seem that popular right now because he's pissing off a bunch of his ex-slaves by effectively keeping the plantation system running. But hey, if the tax money keeps flowing in and the trade revenue keeps coming in, I'm happy. The spices must flow. The sugars must flow. So Napoleon Bonaparte actually goes ahead and signs off on that. But this whole, like, becoming consul for life kind of deal, this isn't really exactly a Republican kind of thing to do. It's not exactly like democratic to just go ahead, seize power, and say you're now in charge for life. So he goes ahead and starts curbing a lot of the revolutionary ideals that were big in France at that time. And as he's, like, going through all the documents of the many different French governments that ran during the first, like, Republican period, it's going through and it's like, oh, like, right to a trial, boom, not gonna happen anymore. Being able to vote in your head of state, I'll just put my name down and say yes or no. I'm not gonna give them any options, so I guess we'll scratch that. Boom, also done. I'll just make myself emperor while I'm at this too. What's this here? And he picks up this, like, old scrap of paper from the colonies, and it's dated August 29th, 1793.
Uh-oh.
Does this end slavery?
Oh no, we can't be having that in this empire.
I mean, like, you're really gonna squint at it to tell that it actually abolished slavery, because it seems like all the terms and conditions of freedom for these people is still slavery. But we can't have that here now, can we? No, sir. I am an emperor. People will be slaves in my empire. So he goes ahead and kind kind of rescinds that policy.
Are you allowed to de-abolish slavery?
Well, apparently Napoleon was willing to do it.
It's called abolishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
If
here's the
you're
thing.
emperor for life, you could do it. Sure.
Yeah. But the thing is that Napoleon's like looking at this, and he's also looking at Toussaint Louverture, right? Who, like, remember how I said like he wasn't super popular with all the ex-slaves? Now that he's just like, fuck you, go work the plantations, you know, because we need money. So he's looking at that, and he's thinking to himself, well, I know a thing or two about coups. I've kind of done that myself. And the best way to knock out someone important is to knock them out when they're, you know, most vulnerable, like this, and with minimal force. So he's like trying to like lull Toussaint Louverture into like a position of I guess complacency, if you will. At this point, he's basically allowing him to like run roughshod over the entirety of Saint-Domingue, as long as he like pays the taxes and stuff like that.
So what's Napoleon's? So Napoleon wants to take out this Toussaint
Louverture.
Yeah. What? Why?
Well, he's getting kind of big for his britches.
Yeah, he's like at the end of the day, you want your lieutenants to be there because they owe you for a lot of things. Like at this point, he's put his family into the crowns of Europe. Like, you know, his brother's like the king of Naples, not because he was born into it, but because Napoleon said he can. And his generals are becoming like the Duchy of Gascony or something like that, getting all these noble titles because Napoleon said they can. So they're like, they owe it to Napoleon. But this Toussaint Louverture dude who actually like fought and clawed his way to the top, that's someone with ambition, you know.
You might think that he deserves his position.
Well, I mean, deserves is in the eye of the beholder, and in Napoleon's view, and also in the view of a lot of the ex-slaves, they don't really think he deserves it. But Napoleon's willing to play the long con here. So he goes ahead, he's like, look, I see things are getting a bit weird, you know. We've tossed out all the former like governing documents, and we've created what's known as the Napoleonic Code. But you know what? I'm gonna do you a favor there, Tousey? Can I call you Tousey? No. Okay, Tousey. So I'm gonna let you write your own constitution. You could run Saint-Domingue under your own constitution as governor for life, you know, and just keep that tax money flowing, and you know, keep the keep the former slaves under control, okay? Because I'd hate to have to send over people to help. But if you need me, I got your back, bro. You know, I got one of the best militaries around. I'll send in a portion of my Grand Armée, and we'll sort things out. If you really need me. I mean, I'm not saying you need me, but like, in case you need me, you know.
Just kidding, unless.
Haha, kidding, unless, lol, they're already on your doorstep. And so, in 1802, after seeing like the unrest going on, and at this point, it's like actually scarily reminiscent of the pre-abolition Saint-Domingue, because like the serfs are now going up and burning plantations again and running amok, while like Toussaint Louverture is sending his army, which is also very heavily made up of those ex-slaves, and also now made up of a lot of draftees too, to go and try to put down these other ex-slaves who are pissed off at the condition of being ex-slaves in this effectively slave society. So it's not going so hot, in other words. And Napoleon's like, oh no, whatever will we do? I think it's time that we send over some help. And he just goes ahead. He's like, oh, dear Tousey, heard your plea for help. Sending over a military detachment underneath one of my brother-in-laws. Hopefully this can help you out. By the way, he's hoping to drop over for a spot of tea, so kindly, you know, come out and greet him, say hello, and we'll take care of the governing situation for you. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Say no more, say no more. Signed, Napoleon Bonaparte. Boop, sends it off. And by the time that Toussaint Louverture gets the letter, there's the French military basically disembarking at the ports of Saint-Domingue.
As he's opening the envelope.
Pretty much.
He hears the bugles and the drummer boys.
And they're just marching out of the ships. Yeah. And we're not talking about a small force either. We're talking about, like, I would say it was like tens of thousands of troops being sent by Napoleon at this time period to go and basically control the revolts, if you will.
People learn from their mistakes. This would be a little less interesting. I don't think this one works very well.
But basically, as a result of this, Toussaint Louverture comes out and he sees all of this, and he's like, I don't want to fight him, you know? Because, like, at the end of the day, like, it's one thing to mess with, like, an inept revolutionary government, which is, like, eating itself, you know? It's another thing to be dealing with this Napoleon dude, who, like, at the end of the day, Toussaint Louverture still kind of respects, you know? At the end of the day, he rose up from humble origins. Oh, excuse me. He rose up from humble origins. He was able to fight to win his position. And, effectively, he's able to, you know, run things in a decent manner. So, like, maybe it's just a misunderstanding, and he definitely needs the help at this point, with revolts boiling up left and right. So, goes ahead. He checks in with the new chap in charge, and he's like, well, look, I think what you need to do is you should come over and you should visit Paris. You know, come and see Paris, see how we're doing things here. And at least in class, the records are kind of finicky. But it seems like by trick or by guile or by like some sort of like threat, Toussaint Louverture meets with the French army and basically gets imprisoned immediately.
I'm surprised they didn't just like tie a brick to his foot and put him in the ocean or something.
No, they didn't kill him. That's the thing. I guess they were hoping that he could like still act as like a legitimizing figure, because like he still has clout over his like officer corps, if you will, like all the guys who like fought with him in the early slave revolts against the French and then against the Spanish and the British. So they were hoping like they could still have some clout over him, you know. So they basically forced Toussaint Louverture to surrender without things dissolving into an all-out war. And the idea was that, like, haha, we caught your king, you know, like in chess, like, so that means you lose, right? Right?
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, so they take Toussaint Louverture, they ship him back to France, and basically he dies from malnutrition and disease in 1803. So
that sounds more like it.
Yeah, so after less than a year, pretty much, he's perished in France, like a tragic frame of his former self. But meanwhile,
now racism is solved, boys.
Yeah, racism is solved. And then at this point, this is when Napoleon drops his masterstroke, which is, you know that thing about slavery being abolished? Wow. Now that we have 16,000 French troops and, you know, a general who's taken over, like, as governor of the island, we're just gonna go ahead and rescind that. So I'm abolishing the abolition of slavery.
This is the third time.
Yeah, pretty much. So at this point, like, yes, there were like the ex-slaves who were pissed off with how Toussaint Louverture treated them. But at the very least, there was still a potential to rise up and like make your way up in society, you know? Now it's like straight up, you're back as slaves again, you know? And they're like, oh yeah, you and what army? And the French general's like, well, my army of 16,000 French troops. We could do this. And like for a while they kind of do. They just go around and it's pretty horrible. They straight up butcher around like thousands of black men, women, and children who, even when they surrendered, they would just get slaughtered wholesale as like a deterrent, pretty much, to anyone else who would resist. But
as slavers tended to do, yeah.
Yeah, it's some nasty business on the island at this time. But you know what else is nasty business?
Fighting a war overseas while you're also fighting another like 4 or 5 battles and wars against other people in Europe because you're fucking Napoleon.
I mean, for Napoleon, that was just called, you know, a Thursday. But the thing that really hit him was yellow fever. Now, I'm going to need you to, like, rewind back to the beginning-ish section of the first episode where I'm talking about, like, the horrible conditions on the island. You know, because if you're brought over from a foreign land, be it Africa or continental Europe, transported all the way over to the Caribbeans, to this new, humid, hot, tropic environment, and also you're being forced to work in terrible conditions, be it because you're fighting for your life against, you know, former slaves who are rebelling, or because you're being forced as a slave to cut sugarcane all the time, you tend to become very prone to disease. So, by this point,
yellow fever is a New World thing, isn't it?
I don't believe it's a New World disease.
Fever. I think there were some outbreaks in Europe, right?
I thought yellow fever came from Central America or whatever.
Oh no, yeah, it came from Africa and South America. That's right.
Africa and South America, but basically in the tropic areas. So for a lot of the European troops, you know, yes, they fought in like Germany, you know, in Prussia, Austria, northern Italy. None of those are exactly tropical conditions, you know. So they're coming over here with their thick woolen coats, having to fight off in these colonies in these hostile temperatures that are like, you know, swelteringly over like 100 degrees. And then a pandemic or then an epidemic hits them, and it wipes out a huge chunk of the French military force. So now, once again, when all those former ex-slaves demand who's going to enforce this, you and what army, when the French general looks back at his army, which has been decimated by this disease, he's like, oh shit, this isn't going to work out so well anymore. So while he's looking back at his troops puking up their guts and dying from yellow fever, he looks back over at the resistance, if you will, and remember all those generals who kind of fought behind Toussaint Louverture? Once again, the guys who were able to fight off the French and fight off the Spanish and fight off the British.
Right, the people who were loyal to Louverture.
Yeah, well, those guys are still around. And those guys still had their weaponry, and they still had their like chain of command, their military structure, their tactics. All that stuff is still going for them. And now with the added bonus that they know how to handle tropical diseases, unlike these like French Europeans fresh off the boat, they're taking this opportunity, and they're going ahead and pushing back the French at every turn. And so by 1804, at this point, Napoleon's also like, well, shit, now I'm fighting 7 wars, basically, at this point. So Napoleon stopped really trying to, like, resupply his troops in Saint-Domingue. And he's basically went ahead and said, you could start pulling out now. And meanwhile, the ex-slave resistance, now under the leadership of a man by the name of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, goes ahead and starts pushing them back more and more.
How do you suppose they managed to pick a leader, or maybe the chain of command naturally let them choose?
I mean, it'd be like sort of pretty quickly based on who was like, you know, beating up the French the most.
Yeah, it's kind of like a military prestige kind of thing, I suppose. Because keep in mind, they do have like a record at that point, so it's I mean, I don't imagine it's that formal, but I'm sure it's like them just coming in. It's like, oh, hello, grab a seat there, Mr. Dessalines. Yes, Mr. Dessalines. Yes, I see you have a sizable resume here, and you have your cover letter, and I see from your highlights you've routed 5 different French forces, as well as 3 British and 2 Spanish. So tell me, why do you think you deserve the job of dictator of the soon-to-be country of Haiti? And it's like, well...
If you were to describe yourself with 3 words, what would they be?
Fuck the French.
Fuck the French. There we go. Well, Mr. Dessalines, it's nice to have you on the force. You have the job, and you can start working this Sunday. Now, the first task's at hand, now that you've kicked out... Oh, but they do. Because you see, now that you've gone ahead and you've kicked out the French military force, the first task as the new leader of a new country is, aside from drafting a statement of independence, of course, but we'll have a secretary on that, commit genocide against all white people.
All white people?
All white people.
Ah.
Oh, sorry, I missed the asterisk. All white French people.
Ah.
I'm sure you could never get misconstrued into any sort of hilarious misunderstandings. It'll go.
But this is like the fascinating part here, because so when Dessalines takes over, he issues a standing order pretty much to just massacre all remaining white French people on the island, men, women, and children. To be fair, a lot of them have by this point already fled, either to, once again, Cuba, to mainland France, or to the United States. Because, at the end of the day, regardless of why your colony is burning, be it from slave revolts or because of internal unrest, what have you, it's not a good place to stay, especially when the weather's so terrible. And there's apparently an outbreak of yellow fever all of a sudden. So,
again.
Yeah, there's a good amount of them who just decided earlier on, now's probably the best time to get out of Dodge. But for the remaining population, the justification that Dessalines gave was that, these are the people that enslaved us, that beat us, and, kept us in, the worst of conditions. We're just going to give them a taste of their own medicine,
So Dessalines was also a former slave.
He was a former slave as well, and it was definitely one of the more radical of Toussaint Louverture's followers. Because whereas Toussaint Louverture abolished slavery but instilled serfdom for all the former slaves, Dessalines goes ahead and straight up abolishes plantation systems in what he now calls Haiti, the Republic of Haiti. Haiti, which, by the way, is the name of the island which the country of Haiti is now on. And that was the name that was given to it by the Taino people, the people who got wiped out by the Spanish when they came over. So he's trying to reinvent the place as a purely new revolutionary native government. Native both in the sense of for ex-slaves who were brought to this place, as well as indigenous people who, as I said before, there's not a lot of those folks around anymore. There's some who may have intermarried with the colonists and stuff like that. So there's no, I guess, what you could call purebred Tainos at this time. But he's trying to draw upon that identity to be completely separate from the French at this point. So he goes ahead. He's trying to wipe the slate clean, start over, create something purely for the common folk, if you will. And part of that involves having to wipe out all the former slavers and the former remnants of the slave society. Never mind the fact that, once again, around a third of all slaves in Saint-Domingue were owned by wealthy, free black people, too. So, just because you're black doesn't necessarily mean you weren't complicit in slavery.
Or helping.
Yeah. But as I said, he's kind of the more radical of the folks who took over. And there's a lot of accounts, actually, in which a lot of ex-slaves and people of color, after the whole independence is declared for Haiti, they're okay, cool, we're fine with that. I mean, yes, we didn't like slavery, or yes, we didn't like white people being looking down at us, but at the end of the day, there's still you gotta judge them individually rather than discriminate against them based on the color of their skin.
Genocide is a little bit extreme of a solution.
Yeah, so there's a lot of accounts of people when they get the order coming down, it's oh yes, you got the mail from the capital. Yeah, bills, magazines, a sports game tomorrow, and an order for genocide. Oh, just tear it up, burn it. We'll pretend we didn't see it. So a lot of people at first actually either played dumb and pretended to not have seen the notice, or straight up refused to follow these orders. And it got so bad that after waging a war against the French, Dessalines basically has to take his army and travel throughout the entire country. It's effectively like the world's bloodiest victory lap, and just goes around to enforce the massacre of any remaining white French people in Haiti.
Wow.
Yeah.
How successful was he?
Very successful. But, as I said, white French people. There were, because Napoleon's army at this time was a very multinational army. There were Poles, there were Czechs, and Germans in his army who were allowed to stay and actually set down roots in Haiti. So as a result, there were still white people in Haiti, just none of them were French. So I don't know how they could like check on that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not like they're like going door to door and like you have like a passport and papers that clearly identifies your nationality, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you like know them because like they've lived there for generations, you might be able to get an idea. But like if you're like going to like say a big city area, you know, and like there's like obviously like a lot of like first generation French immigrants to the colonies too. It's like it's kind of iffy. So it's not like you knock on the door and then this guy comes out puffing on a cigarette, holding a baguette and wearing a beret with a curly mustache, and is like, "Oui."
And go,
I'm sure if you go up to someone's
door, I own slaves,
I own slaves.
I'm sure if you go up to someone's door and say, you know, hey, we're genociding French people. Are you French? They'll say yes.
Yeah, you know, because no one lies to you. You know, clearly.
Of course not.
Bro, they're French. They're French. They'll tell you.
Yeah. Haha, surrender. Time to laugh.
But yeah, so like I don't quite know exactly how thorough they're able to do things, but at the end of the day, they do have censuses. Censuses,
I think.
Sense of people?
Is that that's a Latin word, I guess.
Census. They were able to like they kept records of people in the colonies, so they could go ahead and actually like have some rolls go through that. But after your island goes through like a string of revolts, government records aren't exactly super well kept. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were small pockets of white French people who were able to like be like, oh no, this accent is something I picked up while studying overseas in Paris. I am actually an Austrian. See? Yeah.
So this is where Hitler flew off to?
Yeah. He flew over and pretended to be, a Haitian. But
only 230 years before he lived.
He was planning ahead, you know?
Yeah.
You know what they say, like never go through with like trying to overthrow a government and setting yourself up as dictator without having a good escape plan ready. And traveling back in time 230 years and assuming the nationality of Haiti is like, you know, that's some good planning if you can pull that off.
But Hitler wasn't a very good planner. He messed up a lot of stuff. He had his army go in front of his supply line.
Yeah, well, I guess sometimes when you're planning for failure so well, then you inevitably, you know, have to.
Rough.
Yeah. See, that's his ultimate undoing. You know, he planned too well for what he would do if he failed.
And also, like the whole like mysticism, Aztec magic stuff. That was weird.
And also, he decided that he would use a giant ass army to just kill Jewish people.
Yeah. These are the things.
Well, people were fine with that for a while. No one did anything about it.
I mean, people got wind of it afterwards, but like that's the thing. Like they were able to, I guess, keep it on the down low is one way to say it about the Holocaust. But like it took a few years before people even got a sense of how big the concentration camps and the extermination camps were. But the difference between the Holocaust and the genocide of white French people in Haiti is that there's a lot of refugees from Haiti who are getting out there to, you know, countries like the United States, which also has a significant white slave-owning population who are also kind of concerned about a bunch of ex-slaves suddenly gaining their independence on their doorstep, you know? So, like, word of this stuff got out a lot faster, and definitely got played up a lot more, with, like, newspaper headlines screaming about the horrors of Santo Domingo in the United States. So it also like all news about, once again, the French troops rampaging through the countryside and massacring black populations like without any scruple. That kind of just apparently didn't make the presses for some reason. But yeah.
So wait, what was the American press's take on this? On the general, what was their general idea of what was going on?
So starting off, when like the ideas of liberty and like liberty for the slaves and like freedom and all that stuff came about, and also once again, Haiti was technically a republic, so there's like still like wrapping themselves with like the ideas of democracy and stuff. And like America, before like this thing blew up in their face on such a large level with Haiti, we're all about like, our American Revolution shall be a contagion of liberty that shall overthrow tyranny everywhere. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, so apparently our message got through to a bunch of black slaves in Santo Domingo. They're like, oh, wait, what? No. We're talking about like white people and, free whites being able to like have free trade and shit. Not like, abolish slavery. How'd you guys confuse that message? But as a result of this, Americans started to focus more on the whole idea of like blacks being ignorant and like brutish and quote unquote unworthy of liberty. So they viewed like them like trying to use the revolutionary rhetoric as like a bastardization of like true American revolution ideals and stuff like that. There were some, in all fairness, who did say like, like freedom is the natural right of all beings, such as a certain radical by the name of Abraham Bishop from Connecticut. So, yeah, there's a reason. Once again, this is like a minority that, in the grand scheme of things, a minority who were like, yeah, Haitian Revolution, good. And also a lot of this stuff happened before things took a turn for like the genocide. That was more like in 1792, 1793, before things like flew off the handle after like Toussaint Overture getting arrested and then the slaves revolting against the French. Right. So, yeah. As a result of that, there were actually a lot of debates in the United States about what the hell is going to go on as a result of the whole slave revolts. So Thomas Jefferson, for example, was like, you know what? This is what slavery is going to do to our society. Like if we have a large slave population, inevitably our children are going to suffer due to a massive slave revolt. And we're going to be like, I think the quote is, we should foresee the bloody scenes which our children certainly, and possibly ourselves, south of the Potomac, will have to wade through and try to avert them. Else we will be the murderers of our own children.
Wow.
He would have to put down his own slave children, yeah.
I don't think he was talking about those children per se. Yeah. But like the way that he was like looking at this is like we basically kickstarted a revolutionary storm, and like we can't control where it goes. Like, yeah, the French can have it. Whoop the fucking do. Now they're fighting against all of Europe, and now Haiti's got it too. So like maybe our best bet is to get rid of our own slaves in a few generations. Like we don't have a slave revolt on our hands just yet, so we have the time, we have the foresight, we could plan this out. I don't know, 40 years from now, we can abolish slavery, and we don't need to worry about a slave revolt, and we can solve racism in America.
Plus, the slave owners are losing money hand over fist as soon as we figure out this thing called the factory.
Yeah.
There's no way that technological advances will make it more efficient, not less.
Nah.
Oh, no, sir. I mean, trying to pluck out cotton all the time, that's a pain in the ass. Let's switch over to growing tobacco or something. Anyways, it goes ahead. He like gives a few speeches on this. This is like in 1797. Once again, still before the genocide. But then, when he makes this public, immediately, like the vast majority of like Southerners were just like, "The fuck are you smoking, Thomas? Like, sit your ass down. This is
probably the hemp that he got from France."
Probably, honestly. He's just like smoking all that fine kush coming in from Paris. And also like injected with all the liberal idealism of France. And then he comes back and is like, oh, that's right, we actually have to live with this. And they're like, we paid for these slaves. They're a big part of our economy. This shit's not gonna fly, you know? So he goes ahead and actually like backs off on that entire thing.
Especially I bought these human beings. I should be allowed to keep them.
I should be allowed to keep these people. Gosh darn it, it's my property. But funnily enough, as a result of
my bodies,
revolts,
my rights.
Oh god.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Exactly.
Yeah. But as a result of the whole like slave revolts thing, in 1800 there actually was an attempt for a slave revolt, in Virginia, no less. So right in Thomas Jefferson's backyard. It didn't go so hot. They actually managed to go ahead and capture James Monroe.
The president?
Who later became president. Yeah, he was a governor then. They captured James Monroe, and they were basically going to use him and also all the stuff that they captured from like the government buildings and stuff to like negotiate for their freedom. But because of a massive thunderstorm hitting the area, all the rebels kind of like got divided. Word got out, some of the slaves turned themselves in and like basically ratted out the whole thing, and that thing got brutally put down with like 27 of them being executed. Yeah. And as a result of that, everyone all of a sudden was like, look at that. The ideas of revolutionism is going to spread everywhere. And meanwhile, the Federalists, who were like looking for every excuse to not get sucked into France's ever more costly wars during this time, were like, we can't sponsor that. Like, we sponsor French revolutionism. Next thing you know, our own slaves are rising up. Yes, we're all from the North. And yes, we don't have a sizable economy dominated by slavery. But we know better than to just, focus on purely Northern interests and actually, forget about the well-being of our country, which relies on slavery. Once again, the North being kind of complicit in the slave trade in that regard. And the South was also like, well, shit, I mean, yes, we're Republicans and all that stuff, but like, we don't want slave revolts. So like, fuck Haiti. And into like
Democratic Republicans.
They were the Democratic Republicans in the South.
Republicans and the Federalists, or was
Federalists in the North? Yeah.
Yeah, the Whigs happened after Jackson. Yeah.
Sorry.
The Whigs happened after Jackson. They were like.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
The Whigs, I think, were like very like anti-Jackson in particular.
Yeah,
like that was
they were united by the fact that they hated Jackson. I think.
Yeah, pretty much.
Also, John Brown and Nat Turner were born in the same year. That's weird.
Are you serious?
Yeah, they were both born in 1800.
Oh, okay. I could see that.
I
could see that.
Yeah, but John Brown lived to 59. Nat Turner lived to 31.
Yeah. Huh. Different revolutions and rebellions.
Yeah. Add those together, you get 90.
Yeah, look at that. A ripe old combined age of 90. But basically, even the North was like, we don't want to spread this contagion of revolution. And the South is also like, we want to spread revolution, but only to white people. So, no slave revolts, please and thank you. And as a result, America actually refused to recognize Haiti as a legitimate country until 1862, when Lincoln, who's fighting the Civil War at this time, was like, hey, you know what? I mean, if we're gonna make this about slavery, then damn, like, let's go ahead and recognize the OG slave revolts, So he went ahead and sent a delegate over to Haiti. But if there is anything that was good, I guess, that came out of this for America, well, twofold. The first thing is that as a diagnosis of why the Haitian Revolution went through, the Americans were looking at this and they're like, the problem here isn't slavery. Like, slavery's cool and all. It works. It works for us. The problem is who you enslave.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? So, hear me out. You have... The rationale for them is like, slaves, they're like animals, You could capture them from the wild and you could try to like tame them, or you could domesticate them, when you have multiple generations of them. So the wild animals that you capture and you bring in, they're always going to be feisty and they're going to bite you when you try to feed them and civilize them and teach them Christianity. But like those that you've had grow up a few generations in like, under domestic civilizational care, they're the ones that are going to be obedient and they won't rise up as much. So to prevent a slave revolt, why don't we just abolish the slave trade? Yeah, just stop bringing in new slaves, because they're the ones that are most likely going to trigger a revolt to begin with. So we'll keep slavery. We'll just keep out African slaves. We'll just keep African American slavery going. Yes, it's going to work out. It's a brilliant masterstroke.
Yep, right, homegrown, 100% organic, no GMO slaves.
No GMOs, no rebellious thought slaves. Yeah, it's totally going to work out.
Locally grown.
No rebellious thoughts. Definitely no rebellious thoughts.
100% guaranteed. No rebellious thoughts. Why, this one doesn't even know how to think. But as a result of this, you could say that resulted in the abolition of the slave trade. The Haitian Revolution, or at least for America. On the flip side, because Napoleon basically lost his most like wealthy American colony at this time. He also had like the Louisiana Territory as well. But because he lost his foothold in Saint-Domingue, and because he realized that his endeavors in America weren't going to pay him back anytime soon, especially now that apparently the Tsar of Russia is deciding to openly flaunt his, allegiance to the Emperor of France, Napoleon's like, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to sell Thomas Jefferson this large plot of pointless, useless land in the Americas. It's not like anyone's going to make any money out of it anyways. So this the fall of Saint-Domingue arguably was like one of the last dominoes to push Napoleon over into selling the Louisiana Territory to the Americans. So
wow.
Yeah. So Haiti gave a good amount to America, even though America really didn't give all that much back to Haiti. In fact, at one point, Jefferson straight up forbade, like he vetoed a bill that would allow Americans to trade with the Haitians after Haiti became an independent country, just because they wanted to like refuse the recognition of these former slaves as a legitimate governing force. Just in case they spread their revolutionary ideals out, But yeah, no, it's a surprising amount of like overlap in that area there. And you want to know what the most ironic part of this entire thing is?
What's that?
Well, when Dessalines took over, he drafted this whole speech for the Declaration of Independence for Haiti. And the big thing that he like underscored, highlighted, circled, drew arrows to is this idea that yes, we revolted in Haiti, but we do not condone the right for anyone else to revolt in the Americas. In other words, they're like, we're not radicals, please don't hate us, just let us exist and do our own thing. Thank you very much. So like all this fear that like the Haitians would go around triggering slave revolts in Latin America or in the American South, all of that was completely unfounded, to the point where Dessalines was like actively an anti-revolutionary in that regard.
He's basically the biggest disclaimer ever.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like, you can understand why, right? Like, you've just fought tooth and nail to finally wrestle control and declare independence. The last thing you want to do is be quashed by some other imperial power who, is afraid that you're going to spread revolutionary ideals off and trigger slave revolts everywhere you go, That was his original intention. So, like, Haiti was, like, desperate to try to, like, normalize relations with a lot of others. And France, as, like, a little, like, slap to the face to the Haitians for, like, winning. The French didn't try to go back and retake Haiti, but they wanted to, like, collect on the money. So they're like, all right, Haiti, we'll recognize you as a country if you pay for all the damage that you caused to all the white folks of Saint-Domingue. So basically, they tallied up this fucking enormous bill that included, amongst many things, the destruction of plantation property, the destruction of crops, the destruction of ships, deaths of white people, and as a little cherry on top for the debt, they went ahead and added the approximate expense of all the former slaves who are now free. And set the tab to Haiti. Which at this point, remember, it's basically gone through war for like over a decade and has seen their entire economy ruined. And now they have to foot this bill for their own freedom. Like a monetary bill that they have to pay back to their former slavers.
They basically have to buy their freedom back.
Pretty much, yeah. Even though they've basically got it back through blood, sweat, and tears, on the battlefield. And it took until 1947. 1947. Once again, Haiti gained its independence in 1804. It took until 1947 before the debt was fully paid off to France.
143 years.
143 years. And that's not counting all the other debt that they had to incur, partially to refinance this debt. And this is with France also like partways through having like a turn of heart and being like, yo, is it kind of a dick move that we're making them pay for their own independence? Why don't we just like,
reduce the bill a bit.
Reduce the bill a bit. Like, we're not going to completely cut it out. What are you talking about? We need money. But
give them a little cousin's discount.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's an interesting relationship in that regard. And France, after losing Saint-Domingue, decided, you know what, colonizing the Americas is way too much of an effort. Why don't we go somewhere closer to home? And they decided to try their hands at colonizing North Africa instead. So yeah, it's not like France was just like, oh, well, clearly colonial revolts is an issue, so let's just stop doing it. They just like moved their targets a bit closer to home. But I guess if there is one bright spot in the Haitian Revolution, well, two bright spots. I think this is kind of nice. One thing is that with the loss of Saint-Domingue as this huge economic plantation powerhouse for France, Great Britain and Spain, but especially Great Britain, which was like the biggest economic competitor to France at this time, saw less competition to like produce colonial goods through slave labor. And as a result, there was a larger lobby group that came about who pushed for abolitionism in Great Britain, like colonies and all. So because Saint-Domingue was no longer such a big threat towards British economic interests, they were able to ease off on slavery somewhat. And that allowed the British by like, I want to say like in the 1840s to fully abolish slavery, like throughout all of their lands. So that's a bright spark.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like finding some like little diamonds in the rough here. And the other part here too is that although Haiti went out with their Declaration of Independence under Dessalines being like, we do not condone revolutions in the Americas. There was a very famous revolutionary by the name of Simone Bolivar, who would actually leave Spanish Latin America to flee to Haiti, where he went ahead and received military training and strategic advisors from the Haitians, as well as a sizable loan, despite the fact that, once again, the Haitians were deeply in debt, and also a bunch of equipment and troops to go and basically lead the independence movement of the entirety of Latin America.
So did Haiti basically fund Latin America's independence?
I wouldn't say fund it. I would say inspired it and supported it.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, Haiti, which is also the first country made up of former slaves who were able to overthrow their masters and establish themselves, and also the first Black republic too, I believe. Although it's very small, like it's part of an island, and in many cases, it's oftentimes relegated to become like a small footnote in history. It's got some massive shockwaves, and its revolution is, well, yes, it later collapsed into a dictatorship, and the Republican virtues of it all failed. The revolutionary nature of ultimately all the people being able to be respected, regardless of the color of their skin, is still a very revolutionary thing to instill, especially in the 19th century, like that time. So yeah.
Pretty remarkable.
Hats off to the Haitians, credit where credit is due.